Yirmiyahu was a prophet, was a good chaver of mine. Never understood a single word he said, but we helped him to drink his yain, and we always had some mighty fine yain. Singing simchat le'olam, kol ha'yeladim now, simchat to the dagim in the deep blue sea, simchat to you and me. Yeah.
Welcome to the Haftorah Plethora video podcast, where we might not bring joy to the world, but we do talk about the prophets like Jeremiah. And guess what? We're back to Jeremiah. How do you like that, Rick?
I like it a lot. Jeremiah is the namesake for our video podcast, and bullfrogs and all.
Ribbit, ribbit. I'm Larry Herman, drinking some very fine port this morning.
Okay.
And I'm talking Haftarah with my very good friend, my very good chaver, Rick Muller, our king of cannellation. Hey, Rick, what you're thinking about reruns?
What do you mean? Like TV shows that repeat episodes?
Yeah, or even remakes of movies.
Well, it depends on whether they're as good or better than the original. Like I like Cecil B. DeMille's Ten Commandments, but the animated remake, that Moses, Prince of Egypt, I don't know. Why do you ask?
Because this week we have a remake of last week's Haftarah.
How could that be? Last week we read from Ezekiel, and this week we're reading from Jeremiah.
True indeed. And if you recall, last week our Haftarah was Ezekiel giving the Egyptian Pharaoh a hard time, prophesizing his defeat at the hands of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylonia.
Sure. You even wrote a clever little rap based on Ezekiel's verse, comparing Pharaoh to a crocodile.
Well, this week, Jeremiah does pretty much the same thing.
Does he mock the croc?
No, it's not quite that true to Ezekiel's version or vision, but there's a lot of verse. In fact, if you look at your Tanakh, and not just the Chumash, you'll see that the entire chapter of today's Haftarah addresses the prophecy of the defeat of the Egyptians at the hand of the Babylonians.
So Ezekiel and Jeremiah must have lived at the same time to write about the same event, I'm guessing. Do you think that Ezekiel and Jeremiah knew each other?
That's a really good question, and there's every reason to believe that they did know each other. In fact, there are rabbinic and Talmudic references that suggest that Ezekiel was Jeremiah's son. They both lived in Jerusalem for part of their lives, and each of them was exiled by the Babylonians, or at least due to the Babylonians. Jeremiah to Egypt and Ezekiel to Babylon. It would appear that both of them favored and were favored by the Babylonian authorities. So it's not surprising that they both had a negative view of Egypt and the Pharaoh, and a positive view of Babylonia or Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar.
You know, I think there was a TV movie made about Jeremiah. Maybe we can do a remake of that and throw Ezekiel into the plot line. You know, the relationship between them, little conflict, little romance. Maybe we should pitch this idea to some of our Hollywood friends.
Sounds like a great idea, and we do have a few Hollywood friends in the Kehillah, but don't quit your day job just yet.
Or our Haftorah Plethora gig.
That either. Anyway, the closest we get between Ezekiel's and Jeremiah's verses of prophetic doom is that both of them refer to the Nile as a symbol of Egypt, and both foretell its destruction, raising, and the dispersal of the Egyptian people. Jeremiah is a bit more specific this week in his description of the Babylonians' conquest of the Egyptians, and Nebuchadnezzar is mentioned immediately at the very beginning in the first verse of the Haftarah. But the similarities are unmistakable.
And it's easy to connect to the Parshat. Last week, we were in the middle of the 10 plagues. In both cases, God is wreaking judgment on Egypt. But how does Jeremiah connect this to us?
I'm glad you asked. Just like last week, the conclusion of this week's Haftarah offers a prophecy of hope to the people. This week, in verses 27 and 28, it addresses, quote, my servant Jacob, an obvious reference to Jacob as Yisrael, or the people Israel.
Yeah. And those two verses start off almost identically, and they have the most dramatic trope in the entire Haftorah.
That's right. And that's a good opportunity for you to tell us a bit about the trope. What's your trope drash today, Rick?
Well, I like to look for the rare trope. So there's no pazers today. There's no zarkaz or sigol, but one of the rarest trope after those is a tilishak gedolah. It looks like a little balloon leaning to the right. And verse 27 starts with it, and verse 28 on the word you. So to me, it didn't have to be there. Al tira, don't be afraid, is the next a couple of words with a ger shaim on top, looks like a quotation mark. And it could have just started al tira, but Jeremiah put the you in there to make it personal. Again, you have to picture the audience a couple thousand years ago, no TV, no newspapers. They're just listening to somebody.
No internet?
No internet. And they're, if you're standing there, sitting there, and somebody says you, it's going to perk your ears up a little bit. And the Tilishah Gedolah on top of that, again, Aharon ben Asher, the last Masoretic rabbi, he's the one that officially put these trope down that we have today. So to me, there's a real emphasis there on, hey, you, don't be afraid. It'll be okay.
So I got an idea, Rick. That suggests something. So yes. The beginning of the Haftarah, or most of it, is, you'll forgive me, a little dull in terms of the trope. Maybe the audience is falling asleep, especially when they're talking about the destruction of Egypt. And maybe they're saying, hey, what's this got to do with us? And right. So at the very end, when Aharon ben Asher really wants people to listen, he spices up the trope. He starts off with a, hey, you, listen to this. Mm-hmm. And he gets them to hear the vision of hope.
Right.
How do you like that?
That's great. Great stuff. And that's bracketed by a Tilishah Kitana, the beginning of 25, and later on in verse 28. So Tilishah Kitana, again, looks like a little balloon leaning to the left. And especially 25, it's the pronouncement, this is the word of God. Usually it's ko-amar, but here it's just amar. But then you have the kadma v'azla, very dramatic, very high note. I know you like that. So that's the major fireworks are in the second part of things. The first part has just one trope that I wanted to talk about. You want to wait and do that later?
Well, I think we're going to start the chanting so you can do it before we chant. But before you give the mini trope drash on the beginning,
okay.
I think we'll start off with verses 13 through 24, and then we'll conclude with verses 25 through 28.
Okay, but it's in verse 16, so let me do it before I sing, so people
Go ahead.
Watch for it as it comes. So in verse 16, you pointed out when we talked about it before the session here, Kuma v'nashuva el amenu is a munach lagarme, which is the special munach. It looks like a right angle, and it has a line after it, the pasek. It separates itself from the rest of the phrase. And then v'nashuva, and we were both talking about it, and I was trying to remember where I heard that, and I found it in our prayer book, page 184, which we don't really do much anymore because we don't take the Torah out or put it back. But the
soon, man.
Yeah, very soon, very soon. You got vaccinated. Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm a happy man.
So the second line after uvnucho yomar, and then we go silent. There's a kuma there, kuma Adonai limnuchatecha, and then at the end, hashivenu Adonai elecha v'nashuva. So there's the kuma there, there's the v'nashuva there, and somebody who put that prayer together, I don't know who, must have known Jeremiah and took those two words there. Kuma is arise, v'nashuva is return. To our people is the rest of it, but they used it. The rabbis chose that piece for that prayer. So I like the resonance there.
And I like the idea. One day soon we will all arise and return back to the shul where we can all daven together.
Yeah.
All right.
Good thing.
Why don't you give the
Okay.
page number in the Chumash, say
Right.
the bracha, and the chanting, please.
Okay, so it's page 395, commentary on top, of course. It's chapter 46 there, starting verse 13, bottom of 395. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Hadavar asher diber Adonai el Yirmiyahu hanavi lavo Nebuchadrezzar melech Bavel lehakot et eretz Mitzrayim agidu v'Mitzrayim v'hashmiu v'migdol v'hashmiu v'nof Uvtach panches imru ityatsev v'hachen lach ki ochlach erev svivecha madua nischaf abirecha lo amad ki Adonai hadafo hirba Koshel gam nafal ish el re'ehu vayamru kuma v'nashuva el amenu vel eretz moladtenu mipnei cherev hayona karu sham Paro melech Mitzrayim Shaon Ha'evir Hamoed. All the way to 24, yeah? Chai ani numa melech Adonai tzvaot shemo ki ketavor beharim uchecharmel bayam yavo klei gola Asilach Yoshevet Bat Mitzrayim Kinof L'shama Tiyeh V'nitzta Me'en Yoshev Egla Yefefia Mitzrayim Keretz Mitzafon Bava Gam Schireha V'kirbach Ke'egle marbek, ki gam hema ifnu, nasu yachtav lo amadu, ki yom edam ba'alehem et pekudatam, kolach kanachash yelech, ki v'chayil yelechu, Uvkardumot ba'ulach kechotve etzim kartu yarach numadunai ki lo yechaker ki rabu me'arbe ve'en lahem mispar hovisha bat Mitzrayim nitna Beyad Amsafon.
Very nice. You know, Rick, it's your chanting is beautiful, but for the most part, those verses there, very repetitious, at least in terms of the trope.
Mm-hmm.
Just a few things you talked about, and there was that strange yativ on the word ki in verse 18. I don't really make anything of it, but every once in a while we've got a accented trope on a very small word, which we've commented in the past about.
Yeah.
In any case, now we come to the fireworks, right?
Right. And Jeremiah's calling out the main god of Egypt, Ammon, Ammon-Ra. You can see it down there in the commentary. So everything, lots of things can be directed at God, our God versus the Egyptian gods. There's a lot of that dynamic in the Torah and here in the Haftorah.
But isn't it just in terms of the story itself and not necessarily the way the trope does it? if you read the text, and I'm looking at the altar translation right now, but it's the same subject matter in our Chumash. You've really got a three-sided battle going on here, because it's Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians who are fighting on behalf of God, Adonai, our God, and the Israelites.
Yeah, if you attribute everything to God as manipulating things, then yeah, that you could say that. The same thing about Cyrus, that he was God's
Agent, God's agent.
in getting us back to the land of Israel. So yeah.
All right.
Okay.
You ready to go with verse 25 to the end?
Ready. Amar Adonai Tzvaot Elohei Yisrael Hineni Foked El Amon Mino Ve'al Paro Ve'al Mitzrayim Ve'al Elohecha Ve'al Malachecha Ve'al Paro Ve'al Haborchim Bo Untatim Beyad Mevakshe Nafsham Uviyad Nebuchadrezzar Melech Bavel Uviyad Avadav Ve'acharechein Tishkon Ki Mekedem Neum Adonai. So the Gedolah, even though it's on the first letter, you hardly ever sing it there. You sing it where it should be stressed, which is on the taf.
Oh.
It's a pre-positive accent. There's only two of them, but you do it on the syllable it should be. Ve'ata al tira avdi Yaakov ve'al techat Yisrael. Ki hineni Moshiacha merachok ve'etzaracha me'eretz shivyam ve'shav Yaakov ve'shakat ve'sha'anan ve'ein macharid ata al tira Avdi Yaakov Neum Adonai Ki idcha ani Ki esechala Bechol hagoyim Asher idachticha shama Ve'otcha lo esechala Ve'yisarticha lamishpat v'nakeh lo anakeka.
Very nice, Rick. You know, I'm struck. I mentioned this at the beginning, the similarity between Ezekiel last week and Jeremiah this week. And here, positioning them in history, at least as best as I understand it, they're both around the same time, and it's occurring about a century after the dispersal of the northern kingdom of Israel, but it's just a few years before the final destruction of Jerusalem and Judah at the hands of Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians.
Yeah.
And yet here the Babylonians appear to be the rescuers of the Judeans and of the Bnei Yisrael, and both prophets in the Haftarah end with this message of hope that God, our God, Adonai, will smash and disperse our enemies, in this case the Egyptians, but will protect us. And of you I will not make an end, is the way that Alter puts it.
Yes. Yeah, the word chala, esechala twice.
But we know that the very same Babylonians are going to come, and they're basically going to defeat and disperse what became the Jewish people for a long time to come. Well, it wasn't such a long time because, as you mentioned, Cyrus, but it was the first dispersal, and it was basically the end of that long period of independence.
Yeah. If you take the long view of things, it's talking about God is going to end nations. Nations come and go, but our people keeps going on. So
what's that phrase that we hear so much recently? The long arc of history
bends towards justice. Yes.
Bends towards justice.
Uh-huh.
So shall it be.
Yep.
In any case, let's hope that that's true for all of us. Let's hope you all get your vaccine soon.
Mm-hmm.
And Shabbat Shalom. We'll see you next week.
Shabbat Shalom. Have a good one.